as Warboss Gitslaya rampaged through deviant debaucheries, crumping every pansy he came across. He also found a plethora of slaves and pitiful creatures that frequently got shot up or smashed along with their cruel masters when the orcs burst in the door. For those fortunate enough to receive such mercy, it was a dream come true. Gitslaya and his boys also came across a few orc slaves that had been implanted with some kind of strange brain control device. These orcs were dressed funny, and apparently they had been used as butlers and objects of mockery by the Drukhari. Gitslaya did not have a dock on hand or time to remove these things properly, so he simply yanked the implants out of the orcs' heads and added a few more boys to his mob. These new orcs were quickly termed no-brain boys, because they didn't really talk or do much besides act on the lowest and simplest of orc instincts. Follow the biggest, fight, and win. As Gitslaya rounded a corner, he suddenly came face to face with the enraged homunculus Maestro Pyotr Chopovsky and his rack and grotesque attendants. You ruined my symphony of suffering, my magnum opus of misery, my nocturne of not having a good time. You've destroyed it, and now I'm going to be composing a new body of work. Well, quite a few bodies by the looks of things. You will know the wrath of Pyotr Chopovsky. Without waiting for orders, the no-brain boys charged forward with wild shouts of "War!" Before the boys could even raise their makeshift cudgels, grotesques stepped forward and seized the first two as racks effortlessly snipped through their limbs with gruesome shears. Chopovsky himself gripped the final orc by the neck and hauled it off its feet with surprising strength. His pain gauntlet danced over the orc briefly, before the creature began to swell and his flesh turned a sick color of black and brown. The orc gave a muffled cry of pain before he burst, engorged with exotic foul toxins and horrid fluids. Gitslaya was unfazed by this brutal display, and the war boss gestured for the homunculus to come at him. Maestro Chopovsky gestured for his minions to stay back. This barbarian was going to experience high Drukhari culture personally. You are an uncultured barbarian, a Philistine, an uncivilized lout, a vulgar, brutish, brainless, tasteless, uncouth churl of the highest order.
And you are a big cat with a big mouth.
Gitslaya was tough, but he wasn't too keen on finding out if his hearty constitution could handle the sadistic concoction that Chopovsky carried. Fortunately, Gitslaya was quick, very quick enough to catch a witch off guard. Chopovsky came at Gitslaya, lunging and trying to catch him with his pain gauntlet. This gave Gitslaya a chance to gauge his enemy's speed and skill. After a final thrust, the warboss caught Chopovsky's gauntlet in his claw. But before Gitslaya could snap his claw shut, the Maestro had already slipped away.
You're quick for an oafish buffoon.
You strong for a weedy pansy.
The orcs cheered on their warboss. The racks and grotesques made sonorous keening sounds of agony in support of the Maestro.
You're flat, Jerome! Don't make me alter your vocal cords again!
The rack hung his head in shame. The two went back and forth, Gitslaya being sure to avoid the malignant pain gauntlet, and Chopovsky avoiding the warboss's titanic claw. Eventually, Gitslaya missed his attack and slammed his claw into the wall. Chopovsky saw his opening and dashed forward. Unfortunately for him, Gitslaya quickly swung his claw back, bringing a hefty piece of the wall with him. The Maestro realized what was happening a little too late and was clobbered by Gitslaya's backswing. Gitslaya was about to finish off the Maestro when he heard footsteps coming down the hallway. Dozens of heavily armed Drukhari began rushing in and firing on the orcs. A few boys dropped as the racks and grotesques pushed forward to save the Maestro. Gitslaya realized he was outnumbered and trapped. He looked over to the wall that he had torn open, and there seemed to be an empty shaft of some sort.
Come on, boys! We gotta keep moving! Ain't no sense dying in this stinking place!
Gitslaya leapt into the darkness. Krumpa and the remaining orcs followed him. He was down to about 10 of them now. What Gitslaya didn't realize was that he had just jumped into the central garbage chute of the Pleasure Palace. All of the trash and leftovers from the depraved indulgences of the clientele were simply dumped into the shaft, which ended in a dimensional rift which sent all their refuse into the bone midden of Komara. As Gitslaya and his boys jumped down the shaft, Chapovsky shoved the wall off himself, and his racks helped him to his feet.
Shall we follow the Maestro?
Follow him? Into the bone midden? Ew, no. That is where poor people live. Oh, I feel like my artistic integrity has already been compromised, even thinking about it.
After falling for quite some time, Gitslaya and his boys had a surprisingly soft landing. Apparently, the cleanup crew that had followed behind Gitslaya's rampage had been dumping the bodies of deceased patrons down the chute. And that's exactly what the orcs landed on, with a loud, wet crunch. Gitslaya looked around, but he could barely see anything around him. It was so dark, and his auspex were on the fritz at the moment, and he couldn't get his heat vision working. As he and the boys climbed to their feet, Krumpa managed to get a lumen stick he had on him to light. In the dim, eerie glow, there were dozens of pairs of eyes that reflected the light back at the orcs. The eyes began to move forward as Gitslaya readied his claw. His big shooter had run out of Dhaka back at Deviant Debaucheries.
Boss, I think we might have come to the wrong neighborhood.